So what I'd like to do is, again, just do a first frame of reference to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. And again, just as a synopsis, we're going to look at defining business applications in that scaled agile framework. And we're definitely concentrating on large, complex IT projects. So again, if you're looking at doing this on a onesie twosie kind of thing, this webinar may not be exactly for you. We're definitely looking at these large institutions that are trying to scale Agile across a number of different departments and across the globe. We'll definitely go through and help you figure out where you are in that transition from Agile to help you understand, are you at the beginning, are you at the end, are we doing this full blown across the organization, and also some of the challenges that a lot of organizations face that may not come up when you do Agile in a smaller environment. Both Jeff and I have seen in our deployments as well as in our experience, and a lot of our customers recognize that when you're deploying Agile in a large scale, it's much different than it would be in a small team. And at the end of the day, we're going to give you a little bit of a brief demonstration on how we see that tools can definitely help in solving a lot of those challenges and where the role requirements are in. So again, hopefully you'll get kind of those three things out of the webinar by the end of the hour, and we'll get right into it. So first, what we'd like to do is definitely kind of show you where we are in the environment, okay, to kind of give us a context. I'm sure we've all had some type of business plan given to us at a high level. The organization goes through and says, as an example, we want to increase revenue by $50 million. And that would be the very beginning business plan. And then after the business plan, we definitely look at the number of different initiatives that the business will come up with on how do we get to that $50 million. So some of that initiatives may be, you know what, we want to expand globally. And more specifically, we're going to expand into Australia. And that would be one of those initiatives. And out of those initiatives come a number of different projects. And a number of different IT projects could be creating this transactional database to support them. It could be an external facing project where you create a website. And all those projects then get funneled into the rest of the organization to actually go and deploy them. So we have a number of different development methodologies. You'll have the business involved. You'll have a number of morphing roles we're seeing. We're seeing people in a continuous delivery mode. We're also seeing people in DevOps. We see a lot of different development methodologies that are being used, whether it be waterfall and agile and iterative and bimodal. And Jeff's definitely had a lot of experience in this area, and he's just going to speak to a little bit of some of the challenges that you face when you have a bunch of different roles faced in that kind of engine producing all those projects.
Yeah, one of the things that we've seen, especially in this blue box over the last 10 years or so, is that there has been a tremendous amount of innovation in the individual silos. So development organizations have become very focused on improving the way that they develop software, whether it's being agile at the team level or all of the different development tools that are available to the teams, these purpose-built tools that are available today for them to do their jobs. In the testing space, we've seen the Testing Center of Excellence kind of rise up and really gain in popularity there. And there's been a focus on how do we test as best we can. But ultimately, the cost of all that integration has been the disconnect between the silos. Everyone's been so focused on the innovation within their silos that there hasn't been the focus on the end-to-end that there needs to be. And really, the chaos within this blue box is the result of, now there are more people involved. There are more dependencies between those people and between the projects they're working on. So you have an Agile project that's dependent on a waterfall project that's dependent on work that's being done potentially by a third party outside of the four walls of your organization. So you've got a testing partner that you're working with in India, or maybe a development partner that you're working with in Brazil. And all of those people, those dependencies are across a variety of geographies and cultures, and then the tools that all of them are using are disconnected, and there's more and more non-technical people, if you will, being responsible for software development today. But ultimately what this does is it causes software delivery to break down at scale.
Yeah, and that's a great example of kind of where we see the environment today. And hopefully, again, a lot of you like, you know what, yeah, that's where we are. And those are some of the challenges we have. We're going to get into some of the more challenges specific to Agile in a couple slides as well. But we're also recognizing in very large, complex organizations that there are a number of different pressures that IT organizations are faced under. And the very first one is definitely coming from the business. And the business has a number of different challenges and requests coming into IT. Number one, they just want everything faster. So at the end of the day, it comes as no surprise. They want things faster. They want things quicker. They want things done at at lightning speed. And the quicker that they can get it to market or the quicker they can use it, it's an advantage to them. So it comes as no surprise. Everybody wants everything faster. And at the same time, and it's a little bit conflicting, they want to have higher quality. So at the same time where they want things quicker, they also want it to be perfect when they get it. They want to be able to use that quality, whether it be in internal processes, sometimes also external processes. It may be able to increase the likelihood of a sale or competitive advantage, or even just be able to be a table stakes. Sometimes the level of quality really puts you at the same table so you're not behind coming out of the gate. And thirdly, the business also wants, people to be innovative. They want to have creative solutions because being the status quo is not good enough. As we see in the day and age today, everything to do with technology needs to be updated, needs to have the latest version, needs to have the latest creative way to solve those solutions. And that's where the business, again, has kind of a three-pronged approach, and there's some pressures being put on everybody delivering these IT projects from the business side. Then from another side, we also see in a lot of these large institutions, there's challenges when it comes to regulations. And whether it be an internal regulations or process or policy, because again, as we get bigger and much more robust, there needs to be some type of standards or some types of reassurance that everybody's doing things similarly and it's not the wild, wild west. You also have regulations coming from, government bodies. So if you're in an insurance industry or a healthcare industry, you have people that are telling you how things are supposed to be made. If you're creating a physical product, you're also wondering what are the components going into it. And these regulations are changing all the time. And all these IT projects that are being produced in whatever methodology need to be in compliance with it. And at the same time, there's also that complexity. So depending on, let's say you're producing a Boeing 747, there is a highly complex set of details that you need to meet up with. Or even if you're in healthcare, you may think of something small, like if you're doing something for a pacemaker. There is definitely a lot of complex things that need to be addressed. And if you don't get them right, you're definitely going to be facing whether it be fines or, in some cases, jail time. And the third piece of regulatory would be audits, right? We're talking about where a lot of the audits, you have to be able to prove that you're actually being in compliance of these regulations, right? And that third force that we're talking about from a pressure standpoint definitely comes from cost. So as we all know, the reason what we got into Agile was we wanted improved speed, improved quality, and reduce costs. And definitely a lot of controls and reductions that companies are looking to do in order to know what that cost is, and that's another one of the pressures that we need to explore.
Yeah, and it's not just about controlling and reducing cost amongst your Agile teams. That rolls back into your centralized IT or your centralized tools teams as well. As an example, I mentioned all of those specialized tools that developers are using these days or testers are using these days. They go out, they find these great tools that meet a specific purpose, but you have centralized tool teams that are responsible for the deployment of those particular tools. And sometimes deploying those tools that work really well for a team can be challenging when you're trying to deploy it at an enterprise level. It can be challenging when you start to put those out there, and now you need to get that new tool to talk to some of the existing tools that you already have in place. And when your tools teams are so focused on doing that type of work, they can't keep up with some of the new requests that are coming in from those Agile teams for them to do the next new and great thing that they want to see. So all of this can result in delays in releases. Companies have made massive investments in Agile and DevOps initiatives, but you're just not getting the ROI that you had hoped to get from this. And we talked about many of those challenges on the previous slide.
So now that we've gone through the environment that you're in, and hopefully, again, you've seen the business plan, you see the initiatives, some of you probably nodding your head going through these pressures, being like, yeah, you know what, the business is always on me to produce something quicker or faster, or I really need to be in compliance with some of these regulations because of my industry I'm in, or you know what, mandate has come down that we need to reduce costs and we need to explore different avenues. And definitely there's a lot of different challenges there. But also just to level set with us too, when some people talk about Agile at scale or scaling Agile, there's definitely different perspectives on where people are coming from, because someone going from a team of 2 to a team of 200, may believe from that standpoint they're definitely scaling Agile. But we also may have people that are going from 2 people to 2,000 teams, and then that also makes a difference. So what we've looked into, and there are some different methodologies to try and help determine where you are on that scale, whether you're kind of at the beginning phase or if you're going full-blown Agile. And one of the methodologies is the Discipline Agile Delivery created by Scott Ambler, and we kind of use this as a basis point to get everybody on the same page on, let's see where we are on that spectrum. And there's a number of different categories or characteristics that you can look at that really determine on, are you actually doing, maybe just a number of different projects in Agile, or are we actually deploying Agile on an enterprise scale? So first and foremost, it's pretty obvious, the team size. If we're looking at the team size and you only have a few people in a room and it's a very small shop, most likely we're practicing Agile on kind of project-based level. But if you're looking at, you have hundreds of teams, right? Which would mean you have thousands of developers and thousands of people working on it, you're definitely looking at more of an enterprise class Agile deployment. And again, these are the types of deployments we're looking at in this webinar and some of the challenges that they may face, because both Jeff and I in our experiences have seen that working in Agile on a project-based level is very successful, but some of those methodologies or practices need to be slightly amended, and they pose challenges when you try and do that at a large level. So another couple factors would be geographic distribution. Again, maybe you're co-located in the same office, or even if you're in the same time zone, right? If you're in New York and in Toronto here in Canada, it's a little bit easier. But if you're going global and you have a development office in Australia, you have one in New York, you have one in the UK, it becomes a lot more difficult to be able to coordinate and how you practice Agile in those environments. Another would be your organizational distribution. So if you have gone to the choice of, I would like to outsource a development team into India, I have my homegrown tools in Dallas, but you know what, I'm also going to hire some people on contract for maybe 6 months or so in Seattle. In your distribution of your resources, and it makes it a lot more complicated whether you are in a single division or you're going to outsource your entire team. And then a number of other ones would be compliance and complexity. We talked about compliance, right? Depending on what type of industry you're in, if you're developing a very simple product or your projects are very straightforward, you may be able to practice Agile at a very basic level. But if you're going into highly complex and complicated industries, we mentioned a few like financial regulations, or you're in insurance or healthcare, like every industry out there has some form of compliance to set to, and it really depends where you are on that spectrum to determine how you're going to practice Agile. And the last one comes down to complexity. As we mentioned, it depends on what industry, and if you're developing, a small boat or developing an entire aircraft carrier. And it doesn't really depend whether it's a virtual product or a physical product. Right? So if you're talking about a physical product, we talk about aircraft carriers or 747s, but also for IT projects that are purely software. There can be an extremely complex project to design the back-end system for a transactional system for JPMC or Bank of America. or any of these companies that are doing millions and millions of transactions on a per millisecond, if not faster basis, that are extremely complex, even though there's no physical or tangible product to be involved with. And after we go through all this, this kind of determines where you are. So it's not, one and done. If you have a combination of geographic distribution of your teams in a highly complex domain and a lot of teams, you're looking at, again, that you need to address Agile in a different environment. But if you only have maybe one of these, right, you could have hundreds and hundreds of people on a team, but that's it. So maybe you're not quite there at a true scaling Agile perspective. And then after you've gone through kind of this analysis on where you are on that spectrum, you can definitely do a next deeper dive, and there's some other methodologies that you can look at to explore on how Agile fits into Agile at scale.
So another approach to scaling Agile is Dean Leffingwell's Scaled Agile framework. And so I've taken that diagram because it kind of lets me lay out not only the different people and interactions between those people as they're involved in scaling Agile, but also a lot of the tools that might be involved along the way as well. So really, and Brad touched on this in a couple of the factors in the previous slide, scaling Agile means more people involved. And more people involved means more dependencies between those people or those organizations that are involved. So kind of walking through the Scaled Agile diagram, the Scaled Agile framework diagram here, and starting from the top and working our way down, portfolio managers need to be able to stay up at that macro level, but they also need to manage their initiatives and the business epics and have confidence that the project level details are still being done correctly. And that's where the BAs and the product owners come into play, because they need to take those initiatives that are being defined for them by the portfolio managers and turn those into actionable requirements. But also along those lines is they need to be able to manage the tremendous amount of change that's coming in at so a minor change to an initiative might result in massive changes to the requirements as they pertain to a particular project. The developers in QA are the ones that are bringing those requirements to life and making sure that they're functioning properly. And there could be, like we've talked about, a lot of different teams involved at this level. Also, you might get kind of that supply chain type of mix in here as well, where you've got different partners or different vendors outside of the four walls of your organization that are responsible for individual pieces of that overall portfolio. So you need to not only understand what your developers and your QA are doing and how that impacts those initiatives and business epics, but also need to get feedback from those third parties that are involved as well and make sure that the portfolio managers have insight into the work that they're doing, just like they have insight into the work that's being done within your organization. And finally, at the bottom right, kind of one thing that I think a lot of people overlook is the role of the support engineer or the service desk in all of this. They're the ones that are getting feedback from the customers and getting that feedback back into the process, getting those requirements, those initiatives updated as a result of the feedback. And a lot of times people think of the support engineers or your service desk as the ones that are taking the calls and logging the issues with the system. All of those production tickets that are coming in and result in defects. But one thing that's often overlooked is that this is also the source of a lot of new work, enhancement requests that are coming in from your customers to your service desk. This needs to be able to get into the life cycle as well, so that it can be planned and defined at that high initiative level and filtered down through the rest of these components as well.
So next up, and actually we had one question from someone where they're just asking what version 1, and Jeff, maybe you can answer it. The question was just kind of where does version 1 fit into that previous diagram? If you want to go back, just and it's a great question to ask as well, because I know, Jeff, you're just giving examples, but maybe you can just talk to that.
Yeah, version one's going to fit in. You know, we've got Rally labeled on here, potentially where you've got JIRA or TFS labeled on here. It really all depends on how you're rolling out version one. I believe version one even has capabilities to go all the way to the highest level of the portfolio management as well.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and definitely kind of Jeff's just going through some examples of some software, and these are the ones that we definitely see the most in most companies. But to Jeff's point, it really depends on kind of how people use the implement those softwares at each organization. So that's a great question as well. So next now, so we've gone through the pressures, we've gone through the environments, we've gone through kind of some different methodologies, and now kind of putting it all together. And again, what we wanted to do was really identify some of the challenges when you are scaling Agile. So we put together a diagram here. Again, when we look at the IT projects, there are a number of different tools in there, a number of different teams. There's Agile task management teams in there. You have multiple teams across the world and in different time zones, right? And it's great. And development is really cranking out, and Agile has really formed some good bases inside there, and they're iterating and producing high quality projects and products at a very high rate, and also with very high quality. And that's fantastic. And one of the challenges that does come up is that as you start scaling and getting bigger and expanding across different teams, you add more people. So some of the questions are, okay, so we're going to add 100 more developers from other teams or changing them over from different methodologies. What are we going to do with them? You have a number of different options. You got to choose, do I put them all in this first team up there? Then I have unbalanced teams. Do I add more teams? Okay, but if I add more teams, then I need to address how do I make sure all the teams are on the same page? We also need to address some concerns around economies of scale. In these environments, we do see a number of different tools, and most of them we see are Atlassian, JIRA, or Rally in version 1, and most of the tools that are used in there. But how do you ensure if one team's on version 5.1 and another version on version 5.2? How do we ensure that they're working together and sharing all of the best practices and organizational knowledge? Give you another example would be, let's say one of these teams has designed a website in Australia, but has no linkages back to another development team that has to replicate the same thing out in the UK. So there's a challenge on how do we make sure that the practices and the knowledge that they've gained through their collaboration and their communication with the rest of the organization gets proliferated across all the different development teams, and to make sure that they all take advantage and don't make the same mistakes as that previous teams. Right? So as we scale and add more teams, there's a lot bigger challenge there. And these are just some of the examples of challenges faced specifically in that kind of development area, and just in the development teams alone.
Yeah, and I think both Tasktop and Blueprint have started to experience some of this in the early days of both companies. When it was one Agile team or two Agile teams, it was pretty easy to do. If there was a dependency between your team and the other Agile team, you could spin around in your chair and say, hey, I want to make this change. Is that okay? They say yes. Okay, you move on. As we've grown into the small to medium-sized business, this is getting more and more challenging for us. But at the end of the day, we're nowhere close to the size of some of these enterprises out there that have thousands or even tens of thousands of IT professionals that are involved in developing and delivering software.
So after kind of these development teams, there's another group. They were definitely on the business side, right? So we have a number of different lines of businesses there. So you have kind of groups. They may be the finance team, they may be the business team, maybe the forecast team. And again, we kind of just group them all into the line of businesses. And we need to make sure that they're involved, right? But they're also, we all know that business people are not development people, and development people are not business people. And in some way, even as you can see this diagram right now, as Jeff had mentioned previously, we have silos built in this environment. So at some point, we do need to address their concerns, but at the same time, be able to provide them an environment to be successful, because or else you would have these line of business people on the left-hand side, all in that bubble on the right with the development people, or you'd have all the development people on the right in the bubble on the left. And that's, as we all know, not usually a good solution, because there are specific skills and tasks that they need to do within their own groups and do very well. As we mentioned, the group on the right, the development team, completely very good at what they do in an agile mindset. And then we have to still be able to work with the business drivers on the left. And on top of the challenges with the business drivers, we also have a lot of pre-existing content. So we see that a lot of our projects are changes or revisions from our current projects. Okay, and we see, again, a majority, and I'm sure a lot of you are nodding and saying, you know what, yeah, we just take the previous version of something and we want to improve it. So you can see there on the left, you may have some processes with all the green boxes, and we just want to amend it for version 2.0 or version 3.0. And you can think of this in very large, complex problems. Think about when you go to an airport and you go and you board and you see the archaic green and black screen when they try and log you in. And the reason for that is that they can't do a complete overhaul of their boarding systems, because it would shut down the entire industry. If you had to redo that project and how long it's been, you just can't afford to do that from a business standpoint. So what you do is you take that system and you do some new improvements, right? You put in some new red boxes. I want to be able to now scan a barcode off of a mobile phone, right? It's still the same process. You add a little bit of changes here and there, but you add and adapt to the current processes. So that being said, there were probably, and one of the challenges in Agile is that a lot of this pre-existing knowledge is in old waterfall or different methodology documentation or systems or people. So the challenge is, okay, so we have all this pre-existing knowledge, we have these documents, maybe they're hundreds of pages long, and we need to turn that into something that's usable for the Agile methodology. So that's definitely a challenge. I'm sure a lot of you out there have these types of projects or types of methodologies that you're struggling, because you got to kind of combine them both. On top of that, you have people too. So you have a lot of people that used to be on these projects, and you need to be able to find a way to take their knowledge, capture it, and use it the next time. As we said, it's not version 1 and 2, it's version 3, 4, and 5, which may be years down the road. And on top of that, you also have systems, right? You may have some architect systems or a system that some of the people in the business use for business process diagrams, and you need to be able to, again, import or use that information, which is critical to the success of this Agile IT project, but at the same time, it's being translated from one form to the next. So that's definitely a challenge to think about, because as you grow and scale in large projects, that's something that some of the challenges that may arise from the business when we start to scale Agile.
And pre-existing knowledge and pre-existing systems is really a big one that I see. In a lot of the conversations that I have with customers, especially the larger customers, at some point, legacy systems, mainframe, that type of stuff is going to come up. And it's almost always said with a sigh that, we have to deal with this. We don't like it, but it's there. It's not going anywhere. And I think a big part of the challenge there is the number of dependencies that are typically associated with those large pre-existing systems. Because they're not going anywhere, and because so many tools or so many of your applications have some sort of tie-in to that legacy or to that mainframe application, that it makes it really hard to touch without impacting a bunch of other applications or a bunch of other projects. So really being able to understand that is important.
Right, and then we have another group in here too, and they're kind of a content, maybe some type of policies or procedures or standards, right? So again, we talk about regulators. Everybody has some sort of compliance that they need to do. Maybe you have finance involved in there. Maybe you have some non-functional requirements you need to deal with. Maybe there's some security or performance standards that you need to address, okay? And these are some types of things. And one of the challenges when scaling is, as we said on the right-hand side, you may have 10, 20, 50, 100 teams. How do you make sure that those standards or those performance metrics or those non-functional requirements get proliferated across all of those teams, but exactly the same way? So we have one customer we talked to who says, my biggest problem is that I have a security team and I go to every single meeting every Agile team has, and we say the exact 75 requirements every single time. Because there was one project that missed one security requirement and it causes a lot of pain. So our solution was, well, you have to involve the security team. Well, that their solution was invite the security team to every single team project, and all their problems were solved because that one person went to every single meeting. However, that may not be the most efficient way to do it, right? But at the same time, we need to ensure that all the projects aren't being hindered by the fact that you're missing a critical piece of information. As we said, some of the ramifications of not meeting those performance or security requirements. Think of anybody out there. If anybody has any type of cloud interactions, I'm sure you've had some type of security person be involved in a conversation. And I guarantee you, for any type of cloud implementation of any software application out there, it's exactly the same requirements, whatever they may be. But if they're exactly the same, wouldn't it be nice to have something where you'll be able to send that information and make sure you don't even need to involve them in the process, but you know exactly what their requirements are? And if they make any changes, making sure those changes happen in every single instance or every single team, regardless of what tool they use or what version of the tool they use or where they're working. And that is definitely a challenge that needs to be addressed, because if you don't think about it ahead of time when you're planning, this can definitely cause you a lot of headaches when you're going Agile at a very large level. And something else when you think about, even in compliance, right? These regulators, let's again take an external regulator. We talked about the market conditions. This is the government we're talking about, and they're going to produce a 150-page document with 450 lines of requirements. Unfortunately, we know the government's not going to change, and they're not going to be able to change to an Agile philosophy, and they're very waterfall-esque documents. So how do you take those waterfall-esque documents and put them in an Agile environment? So just something needs to consider, and how can we actually do that? Because certainly the government's not going to change, so we need to find a solution in order to help address those, to be able to deal with 100-page, multi-line sections and subsections of code. And going back, even let's say your company has some standards they want to adhere to. As we said, as we scale Agile, we want to have some degree of certainty that every single team, an Agile team that gets spun up, right? Let's say we grow and double our size, so now we have not just 20 teams, but 40 teams. How can we make sure that those next 20 teams start off from the same spot where the 20 teams that we have today are, so we can increase the efficiencies and make sure that they're taking advantage of some of the knowledge that some of those Agile teams are doing today? They've dealt with some of the security teams, so here's how to do it. Or they dealt with lines of businesses and saying, okay, here are some business process diagrams and how we dealt with them in the past, to get them spun up and hitting the ground running to fully support the Agile methodology of, we want to be as quick as possible and as lean as possible, but at the same time, making sure we want to be in compliance with some of these regulations. And after that, we also have some product owners and some product managers at the top. They're involved in the process. And definitely there's a number of different people. And these are just, three of the major groups that we think are involved in IT projects when you're scaling Agile. And on top of this, after this, you have to make sure that every single group is aligned with each other. So you have the line of businesses, you have the IT projects, you have the project managers, you have finance, you have security, you have regulators, you have pre-existing knowledge. All of this stuff combined is some of the challenges and headaches that everybody sees in Agile. These lines themselves is a project in itself to try and get people aligned, as Jeff mentioned, keeping those silos, breaking down those walls. And that's just one. We talked about guidance from security and best practices. We also talked about predictability and how to try and accurately help predict the outputs of development. And both Jeff and I have seen in our experiences that there is solution and there's technology that can definitely help in fixing these problems. And some of the alignment issues that we have, Jeff has definitely seen in his experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really where integration comes in. And integration isn't about getting all of the information to all the people all of the time. It's really about understanding those interactions that need to happen between the organizations and getting the right information to the right people at the right time. By understanding that and by having that technology in place to flow this information freely across the life cycle.
So again, as Jeff and I have learned through our experience, there is technology out there, and it's not just one tool. There are definitely a number of tools that can help. But what some of the keys you want to look for when looking for a modern tool, you want to look for something that has that centralized repository that's unified. Again, we want to be able to create a space where all the lines of business, development, finance, security, regulators, product managers can put all that knowledge and capture it. You definitely want to make sure that it's non-disruptive, right? And when we say that, it's saying on the right-hand side there, all those development teams have their tools and are working extremely well, and we want to introduce something that will complement it and work well together and not disrupt all the greatness that's happening in the development space. You also want something that can evolve with your users. So again, as the business evolves, you want that to evolve and improve when ready. So you want to have robust features in order to support it. And as Jeff mentioned, that alignment and trace, you want to be able to drive the trace between that business plan at the very highest level down to the very bottom when you talk about even your user stories or anything at a very level that you're creating your products. And you want that common view across different IT projects. Okay. So next, again, now that we've kind of gone through the problems and solutions, we want to definitely look at kind of where requirements fit in Agile. Okay, we'll talk about just continuous requirements. Briefly, again, we said development right there. They have their stories, they have their tasks, they have their defects. They're definitely iterating very well and producing. And where we see requirements kind of fitting in is, again, as a complementary piece and sliding in on top of or beside that development piece. And there's many different areas where kind of requirements fit in, and the idea of continuous requirements is definitely kind of the mindset where they're living throughout the life of a project, not just before, during, and after, but well beyond that project has been created. So before the project starts, even before development's involved, you have to gather and elicit a lot of the requirements from the discovery and scoping side. So you might have the business, you have a number of different stakeholders. We talk about regulators or fundings. What is the reason why are we funding this project? All that context around it. We want to capture and gather that all before we create those requirements. And then after that, we get into kind of the middle phase and we'll produce requirements. And this is where the key aspect of living is, because we're sending through requirements at the iteration 0. But as we all know, things change. And in Agile, we need to be lean and we need to be able to adapt to anything and provide more information and detail. So that's where the business can kind of live up front in that blue area and then continually work in that environment. And technology has allowed us to be able to integrate and work together with that development piece and keeping people in an environment they're comfortable with. So you're keeping the business in their environment, or the regulators or the lawyers who you definitely don't want in a development tool. But like, we just all know that. It's just a bad idea to put them in there. So one of the things that's definitely good in there is that, again, we want to leave development in their own environment, right? And complement them and give them the information they need to do and not disrupt anywhere else along the process.
Yeah, and in the days of throwing requirements over the wall to the development team, it was perfectly acceptable to export those requirements to a spreadsheet, or maybe the requirements started in a spreadsheet initially, and just toss those over the wall to development and testing. But to have living requirements and have continuous requirements, there are two things that become really important. The first is that collaboration or that interaction between the teams. So a requirement has been developed, Your developers start working on that requirement and writing code, and then they've got questions and clarifications about that requirement. They need to be able to interact with the owner or the writer of that requirement and ask questions, work through some of the challenges that they see with that particular requirement. And that's generally going to be a kind of a one-on-one conversation between the two. But by staying in your tools, you're also logging that conversation and that additional context so that anyone else that comes in, maybe someone else comes in to help write code, someone comes in 6 months down the road, not only can they tell what the current state of the requirement is, but they also have a little bit of that context and the history of what the requirement came from and how it got to that point. Another important piece here is traceability. So as these requirements are changing over time, traceability is important because a requirement change means that as a developer, I need to understand what code is associated with that particular requirement so I can go in and verify whether or not code needs to change. As a tester, I need to understand what test cases are associated with that requirement so that I can go back and evaluate my test cases and understand, do I need to delete a test case? Do I need to update a test case so that I'm validating this in the this particular requirement in the best way possible.
So after you've done kind of all that work, and again, as Jeff mentioned, working together and collaborating together, you definitely need to have those requirements live well beyond that project. And one of the examples I'll give is, again, we've talked to a number of customers, and some of them said, you know what, we are going to work on our fastest project ever, and it's going to take us 7 years to complete. It's just a fact of the matter. When you get to large, complex problems, you can't get them done in 6 months, 8 months. They're going to take a longer time. Again, mind you, 7 years is a long time. But the point is that over those 7 years, there's going to be a lot of change. So in a large organization, you may have contract workers. You may have people move from different team to team. You may have people leave. There's employee turnover. But you have to have the ability to keep that knowledge somewhere. So once you go beyond that 2, 3, or 4 mark, you still know and trace back, as Jeff mentioned, to the original problem or the original collaboration. On top of this, you also need to have this live long beyond the project is done, because as we said, most projects are new versions or new releases of older projects. So if you have a project that was done 3 years ago, you still need that context of saying, hey, why did we implement this feature, or why didn't we do it this way? So again, you can be much more agile in your conversations, right? Because you need to capture that collaboration from before. And this is where it's a little different as well, is that in a small environment, collaboration and communication can all be good, but once you start scaling, collaboration by itself is not nearly sufficient enough. You need to not only collaborate, but capture those communications, those conversations. Because also in 3 years from now, maybe you get audited to prove that you meet some of these regulations, and you need to be able to prove that in an efficient manner. And a good example of, an analogy which is completely not even related to software or IT projects would be building a house. So let's say you get a house, you buy a new build. Day one, you get your keys, and you get also the engineering layouts of the house, right? And 5 years down the road, you decide, you know what, I would love to do some renovations. And what happened? Is this wall a load-bearing wall? Can I take this wall out? And in order for you to really answer that question, you need to have those engineering diagrams. You need to be able to go back 3 years ago when the house was first built, bring them out, put them on your table and saying, yeah, you know what? I can take that wall out. I absolutely can. Or no, I can't. But you have to be able to have that context and that knowledge from before, or else it's going to cost you a little bit of money.
Yeah, and it's not only a matter of costing you additional money, but it's a lot of wasted time, and there's also risk associated with that as well. So my wife and I are in the process of remodeling our kitchen right now, and we just had that conversation, but we have a 40-year-old house that doesn't have any blueprints that we got when we moved in. So we hired an engineer, had him come out, looked around, made some measurements, did some calculations, and he told us that we might be able to remove the wall. So that's great, but I'm really looking to know for sure one way or the other. And I think part of the issue there is that without those original plan, you can't truly understand why the house was built that way or why the software was built that way. You can look around and you can understand how it was built, but without that why, you really don't know. You're putting yourself at risk by not knowing. And then kind of taking that house metaphor one step further, what if you're not trying to remodel a house? What if you're looking at remodeling a 10-story condo and I'm on the second floor? Now an engineer comes in and tells me I might be able to remove that wall. Well, I've got 7 or 8 floors of people above me that are really counting on me knowing for sure. They're very dependent on my wall that may or may not be load bearing.
So absolutely, that's definitely what it is. Oh, sorry, Jeff. We're just finishing up on that one. I know we got about 10 minutes to go, and if anybody does have any questions, absolutely just put them in the questions panel, and if we'll try and answer them and get you out of here on time as well. Again, apologies since we started late, but definitely, Jeff, go ahead. I just want to throw that out there for people.
Sounds good. So I'm going to run through just a very quick demo at this point. I have an integration between Blueprint and JIRA set up in my environment here. And of course, as always, my sessions have timed out. But what I'm going to do as I walk through this demo is this is really focused on the end users and kind of just to give you a little bit of an idea of what this integration or what this connected lifecycle might look like. So I'm in Blueprint right now, and I'm going to start by creating a new functional requirement, and it's going to be for authentication. And I'm just going to abbreviate here so that I can make sure we get through this. So I'll create an authentication requirement, and then I'm going to add a child requirement to that as well. So we've got a functional requirement, and then I've got an ID password requirement here as well. User should provide an ID and password. We'll put a priority on that of high. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this, and then actually forgot to add a priority here as well. Oops. There we go. So overall, this is medium, and again, published. Now in JIRA, where I've probably timed out as well. Oh, we're good there. So I've got my parent authentication requirement. I've come across with some details about the description, but also maintaining a lot of those relationships. Because as we all know, requirements aren't just individual units that can kind of stand alone by themselves, but oftentimes there are relationships between those individual requirements. And there's a lot of context in those relationships, whether it's parent-child, or trace to, trace from type of relationships, but being able to maintain those relationships and understand how that works between the systems. So I'm going to come in here and ask, are there other forms, because we're wondering if there are other forms of authentication that are going to be coming at us. But for ID password authentication, I'm going to go ahead and write the code and resolve this particular issue. Now back here on the Blueprint side, if I highlight these and refresh, we're starting to get these updates coming in. So I can see in Blueprint that, and this goes back to what I was talking about on that scaled Agile framework diagram earlier, that we need to have status and other types of details flow from the level where the work is being done to the level where it's being defined, and even all the way up to that initiative level. So we're indicating that this is resolved. We've got comments here that are flowing across, so we can start to have that social interaction between the folks that are using multiple tools. So I think right there I'm going to leave it so that we've got 6 minutes for questions. And it looks like there is a question there. I don't see the question, so Brad, could you maybe go ahead and ask it?
Yeah, definitely. So we definitely have some questions in here where They're looking at the repository and how large enterprises can justify building that repository. And definitely when you think about from legacy artifacts. So the question was, how do large enterprises justify spending the money to build that repository requirements from legacy artifacts? And more specifically, they're asking about for Word documents, because I think a lot of our environments and a lot of our customers definitely have those Office and Words. And there's a couple of different reasons you can do it. One would be the justification around the efficiencies. So if you're talking from legacy artifacts like Word documents, at some point, some of these are used in new projects. So as you mentioned, projects are very rarely let's build a brand new system which you've never thought about before, and we're just going to come up with it. A lot of IT projects are definitely kind of versions or releases. So just having the traceability, as Jeff mentioned, let's say you do have a repository of requirements from Word docs, and you probably have thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 different requirements in there. So if you want to go back and trace back to them manually, great. You can get someone, a co-op student, and pay them $15 an hour to go through each 100,000 documents to try and find which requirement it went back to. Or you could spend that money and invest in technology, and at a click of a button, you can say, hey, why did we do this 5 years ago? What was the reason? Maybe there's an idea that we did 5 years ago that we thought about, but you know what? As soon as we got it linked to any type of regulation or compliance, we said, no, we just can't do it, and it hasn't changed. So do you want to spend the extra effort also in the future being like, okay, let's think of the same idea and go through the same exercise we did 5 years ago? And that wasted time, and again, you can relate time into money and the people that you're spending when they could be developing code or they could be working on business processes. And that alone can justify the expenses on how to create that repository or that centralized, unified source for past projects, but also current and future projects as well.
Yeah, I think that's those are good points. A lot of times there are hidden costs associated with manual effort that we do day in and day out, and oftentimes what I see is that people have been doing some of these little manual things for so long that they don't even think about it. So your boss comes to you and says, hey, I need answers to X, Y, and Z because we're being audited and we need to know what happened and when. Well, you could go, again, look through these Word documents, try to figure out the relationships, who did what and when, or if you have the appropriate technology in place, then it becomes a very easy, yeah, let me check, or here's a report that tells you exactly what you need. And now you're not paying your team to go through and provide information for audits when they could be developing software, testing software that can be delivered to your customers.
Yeah, and I think another point too, and this is the challenge between doing Agile kind of in a small project versus a large enterprise, which we're talking about, is that, as Jeff mentioned before, you could just swivel around and talk to your partner saying, hey, why are we doing this? Or when do we do this? Or what is this requiring about? But think about that one conversation that then happens 1,000 times or 10,000 times, which is great. And collaboration is definitely the way to go. However, you also need to capture those communications and collaboration somewhere, because at some point you're going to have the same question as someone else out there, most likely. So if you can future-proof in saying, hey, you know what? We're going to enable and really enhance collaboration by capturing the historical relevance of all those conversations so we can save the time and efficiencies of different parties out there. That in itself, if you can cut down on emails, how many times that, oh, you know what, I could have sworn I had this conversation in an email somewhere. Well, you could just use a tool and use integrations to say, hey, there was a conversation, as Jeff just showed in JIRA, you went back and forth, it's all there. It's traced back to the requirement, it's traced back to the complicated scenarios, and also right back to that specific project as well. Okay, that's a great question. And I know we're hitting the top there, so we did want to just kind of discuss a couple of things here. There's some upcoming events. Definitely there's a product demo for Blueprint on November the 18th, and we definitely have a Twitter chat coming up on December the 3rd between Betty and Jason, between Tasktop and Blueprint, and definitely use that hashtag if you want to go through. And if you have any questions, definitely you can email us. You can definitely look online. There's definitely a lot of different ways. If you have any questions for Jeff and myself, by all means, you can help out through. I know we have a few more questions that are a little more specific, and what we'll do is, again, just in the interest of time, because I know we're at 2 o'clock, we can definitely reach out to you directly. Jeff and I will be more than happy to help answer your specific questions. And then if you have any resources or surveys, definitely as you leave, please fill it out. So Jeff, unless you have any other closing comments?
No, I don't have anything else to add. Thank you for your time.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. And you can definitely check out the recording online if you want to read through it again. And we'll hope to hear you and see you next time at our next webinar. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.